The day the Return to City list was posted, my name was right there in the third row. Clara 1. For 6 years I had dreamed of seeing those 2 words on that board. I had just come back from the drying yard with mud on my boots and rope burns across my palms. The last sack of grain had been heavier than the rest, or maybe I was just too tired to carry hope and hunger at the same time. I remember standing in front of the notice board, squinting at the paper while the wind pushed loose straw across my feet. And there it was. My name. My way out. Back then, a spot on the Return to City list was not just a transfer. It meant a factory job. It meant a registered address. It meant legal documents, food ration cards, a real bed, and a future that did not begin and end with the fields. I should have smiled. I should have laughed. Instead, I saw my stepsister Sylvia Yao walking out of the youth administration office, clutching a brown file envelope to her chest. The envelope had a white label on it. The red official stamp was still fresh, and on that label written clearly was my name, Clara 1. For 1 second the whole yard went silent around me. Then every sound came rushing back. Carts creaking, people whispering, grain being shoveled, a radio playing somewhere inside the office. Sylvia saw me. Her face froze. Then she tried to hide the envelope behind her arm. I crossed the yard before I even knew I was moving. And quote, "Why do you have my file?" And quote, I asked. My voice was not loud, but everyone near the office turned to look. Sylvia pressed the envelope harder against herself. Her eyes turned wet in an instant, the way they always did whenever she wanted the room on her side. And quote, "Clara Dawn and Oppos. T make a scene," and quote, she whispered. I reached for the envelope. She held on. The thick paper twisted between us, and the edge cut into my fingers. And quote, "I asked you a question," and quote, I said. And quote, "Why is my file in your hands?" And quote, Mr. Powell, the clerk in charge of the youth files, rushed out with a chipped enamel mug still in his hand. And quote, "Comrade 1, calm down," and quote, he said, already sweating. And quote, "No need to grab things. We can talk." And quote, I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on Sylvia. And quote, "My name is on the list," and quote, I said. And quote, "My production team recommended me. My work points are the highest in this district. She is Sylvia Yao. That file says Clara 1. So tell me, Mr. Powell, who allowed her to pick it up?" And quote, his mouth opened and closed. Sylvia shot him a desperate look. And quote, "Uncle Powell," and quote, she blurted, and quote, "Didn't and Oppos, T we already agree," and quote. She stopped too late. The entire doorway went still. And quote, "Agree on what?" And quote, I asked. Tears rolled down Sylvia and Oppos' cheeks as if someone had turned on a faucet. And quote, "Clara, I know you want to go back to the city," and quote, she said. And quote, "But Mom said our family only gets one chance. You know my health. If I stay here much longer, I want and Oppos T survive." And quote, I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. Then I rolled up my sleeve. My forearm was covered in small cuts from harvesting rice in the rain. Some were old. Some were still fresh. Dirt had dried around the edges because I had come straight from work. And quote, "You won and Oppos T survive?" And quote, I said. And quote, "Yesterday, who was the one who collapsed in the field during the storm?" "Me." "The night before that, who stood knee-deep in the canal fixing the broken bank?" "Me." "Last winter, who fell into the ditch carrying fertilizer, got a fever for 3 days, and was still dragged out to earn work points?" "Me." And quote, Sylvia and Oppos' tears paused halfway down her face. I lowered my sleeve and pulled the file closer. And quote, "So tell me again," and quote, I said. And quote, "Which one of us can and Oppos T survive here?" And quote, Mr. Powell stepped forward. And quote, "Clara, your family agreed to this. Your mother placed her thumbprint herself," and quote, that was when my blood went cold. And quote, "Did I place mine?" And quote, I asked. He went silent. Behind me, more workers had gathered. Some leaned on their baskets. Others stood with muddy trouser legs and grain dust on their sleeves. I heard my friend Mae Dawson push through the crowd. And quote, "Clara," and quote, she said, looking from me to the envelope, and quote, "Why does Sylvia have your file?" And quote, I did not answer her. I pointed into the office. And quote, bring out the registration book and quote, I told Mr. Powell. His face tightened. And quote, that is internal paperwork. You are not authorized to inspect it. And quote. And quote. My file was taken by someone else and quote, I said. And quote. Do not tell me I am not authorized to ask who signed for my life. End quote. He looked away. So I turned toward the gate. End quote. Fine. I will go to the township office and ask whether a return file can be withdrawn without the person herself signing for it. End quote. That scared him. Before he could answer, hurried footsteps came from outside the yard. My mother arrived. Or rather, the woman who had given birth to me. Grace Tang came running with her old cloth bag swinging from one shoulder. The moment she saw the file in my arms, all color drained from her face. End quote, Clara. End quote, she snapped. She reached for the envelope. I stepped back. Her hand closed on air. Everyone watched her. Grace forced a smile, but her eyes were hard. End quote, why are you being so stubborn? End quote, she said. End quote. Family matters should be discussed at home behind closed doors. Don and Oppos. T embarrass us in public. End quote. End quote. Who embarrassed whom? End quote, I asked. She looked away for a second, then put on her motherly voice. End quote, Sylvia is weak. She cannot stay in the countryside. You have always been strong. 2 more years here will not kill you. End quote. 2 more years. I lifted the envelope so everyone could see my name. End quote. When I was 16, I followed you into the Yao family after you remarried. End quote, I said. End quote. When I was 18, you asked me to go to the rural work unit in Sylvia and Oppo's place because she needed to prepare for a factory exam. I went. When I was 20, I was supposed to get a visit home. But you said Sylvia needed to see her fiancé. I gave that up too. When I was 22, the team recommended someone to be a substitute teacher. I was the one who could read and write better, but you said Sylvia was too weak for fieldwork, so I gave that chance to her. End quote. The wind moved through the yard. The file crackled in my hand. End quote. Now the return to city spot is finally mine. End quote. I said. End quote. And you tell me our family only gets one chance. Grace Tang, does this family have any place for me at all? End quote. Her eyes reddened not with guilt but with anger. End quote. You do not even call me mom anymore. End quote. End quote. You stopped treating me like your daughter first. End quote. Someone in the crowd gasped. Grace raised her hand. For a moment, I thought she would strike me in front of everyone. I did not move. End quote. Go ahead. End quote, I said. End quote. Hit me here in front of the whole team. Let them see exactly how cruel you are willing to be when you steal from your own daughter. End quote. Her hand trembled in the air. She did not bring it down. Sylvia clung to her arm, crying harder. End quote. Mom, forget it. End quote, she sobbed. End quote. It is all my fault. I won and Oppos. Go back to the city. Let Clara go. End quote. But while she said it, her fingers crept toward the file again. I caught her wrist. End quote. Stop acting. End quote, I said. She froze. I lifted her hand for everyone to see. End quote. Your mouth says you Don and Oppos want it. So why is your hand reaching for my envelope? End quote. Her lips shook. No words came out. I pushed open the office door and put the file on the desk. The room went quiet except for the faint static of the radio in the corner. End quote. The registration book. End quote, I said again. Mr. Powell stood in front of the desk like his body could hide the truth. Grace stepped inside and tried to shut the door. But too many curious faces were already pressed near the frame. End quote. Clara. End quote, she said in a low voice. End quote. Must you expose family shame like this? End quote. I tapped the file. End quote. This has my name on it. End quote, I said. End quote. When all of you reached for it, why Warren and Oppos? You ashamed? End quote. Her mouth twitched. End quote. Sylvia and Oppos' marriage depends on this. End quote, she said. End quote. The groom and Oppos' family said if she goes back to the city and gets placed in a stable job, they will finalize the wedding. End quote. End quote. And what about me? End quote, I asked. She looked startled. End quote. My job? My registration? my marriage, my future, end quote. End quote. A few days ago I was at the grain yard recording work points for 3 straight days, end quote. May called from the doorway. End quote. I carried sacks with her. She wasn't and oppos t sick. End quote. More workers nodded. End quote. That and oppos s right. Clara was in the yard before sunrise, end quote. End quote. She looked healthier than any of us, end quote. Grace snapped at them. End quote. This is none of your business. End quote. I laughed softly. End quote. A minute ago it was a family matter. Now it is township paperwork. Which one lets you decide? End quote. Mr. Powell tried to close the book. I pressed my palm down on the page. End quote. There should also be a withdrawal letter, end quote, I said. End quote. Where is it? End quote. He flinched. That told me everything. I opened the file envelope before anyone could grab it. Inside were the recommendation sheet, transfer forms, household registration papers, and a stamped withdrawal letter. In the lower corner was a red thumbprint beside my name. I looked at it. Then I looked at my own right thumb. Years earlier, a shard of glass had cut across the center of that thumb while I was planting rice. The scar ran straight through the print. Any thumbprint of mine would show a broken line in the middle. This print was perfect. Round. Unbroken. I held it up. End quote. Whose thumbprint is this? End quote. Nobody answered. Grace said, end quote, your scar is old. Who can tell? End quote. I looked at her. End quote. You do not even remember which thumb was cut. End quote. I dipped my thumb in the red ink pad on the desk and pressed it onto a clean sheet of paper. The broken line showed clearly. Then I placed the 2 prints side by side. The whole room went silent. Sylvia began to cry harder. End quote. I didn't and oppos. Know about the thumbprint, end quote, she said. End quote. Mom told me Clara had agreed. I only came to collect it because she told me to. End quote. Grace stared at her, stunned by how quickly Sylvia had pushed the blame away. I watched them both. Grace was my real mother. Sylvia was her stepdaughter. But for 6 years I had been the one they used like firewood. Easy to split, easy to burn, useful only when someone else needed warmth. I folded the forged withdrawal letter and put it in my pocket. End quote. Seal the file, end quote. I told Mr. Powell. End quote. Until this is investigated, nobody touches it, end quote. He protested. I stood at the door and did not move. With half the production team watching, he finally pulled out a seal slip and locked the envelope inside the metal cabinet. The sound of the key turning was dry and final. But I knew this was not over. People who had dared to forge a thumbprint would not leave the rest of the evidence lying around. So instead of going back to the dormitory, I went to Red Flag Team and Oppo's office. The team leader, Mr. Martin, was repairing a broken chair when I arrived. He looked up and grinned. End quote. Clara, the list came out, didn't and Oppo's it? I told you your spot was secure. End quote. I placed the forged withdrawal letter in front of him. His smile disappeared. He read it once, then looked at me. End quote. Who did this? End quote. That question nearly made me cry. All morning, people had told me to be quiet, to think of the family, to make room for Sylvia. Mr. Martin was the first person who asked who had wronged me. I told him everything. When I got to the part about Sylvia holding my file, his face darkened. He called the accountant, Mr. Price, from the back room. Mr. Price came out with his abacus under one arm. End quote. I knew something was wrong, end quote, he said. End quote. Grace came by a few days ago asking if I could write a vague certificate about Clara and Oppo's work points, end quote. End quote. Did you? End quote, Mr. Martin demanded. End quote. Of course not, end quote, Mr. Price snapped. End quote. Do I look stupid? Clara and Oppo's record is one of the best in the unit. I cannot make it vague just because someone wants it blurry. End quote. He pulled out the work point register. The pages were thick and worn. My name filled line after line. Canal repair. Clara 1. Night watch at the grain yard. Clara 1. Autumn harvest bonus points. Clara 1. Then he turned to Sylvia and Oppo's page. Sick leave. Home visits. Long absence. Barely any points. Mr. Martin opened the original recommendation draft, carried my name, my record, and his signature. Then, tucked behind it, we found another draft. My name had been scratched out in blue ink. Sylvia Yao had been written above it. The achievements were copied word for word. 3 years of full work points. Canal repair. Harvest duty. Working while ill. All mine. Now placed under Sylvia and Apo's name. My hands trembled not from fear but anger. Sylvia had not only tried to steal my return spot. She had tried to wear my labor like a borrowed coat. Mr. Martin slammed his hand on the desk. And quote, we and Apo's. Going to the administration office now. And quote. I shook my head. And quote, not yet. And quote. He stared at me. And quote, why? And quote. And quote, because if they know we found this, they and Apo's. I'll destroy whatever is still at home. And quote. Mr. Price understood first. And quote, old letters and quote, he said. And quote, registration papers. Ration records, and quote. I nodded. Mr. Martin wanted someone to go with me. I refused. And quote. I have kept quiet in that house for 6 years and quote, I said. And quote, today I am done. And quote. Halfway home, May ran after me with a torn envelope in her hand. And quote, Clara. Wait. Sylvia dropped this when she left the office. I saw your name on it. And quote. The envelope had already been opened. It was addressed to me. The postmark was from 3 years earlier. The sender was the workers in Apo's school in the city, the same school I had attended before I was sent to the countryside. My fingers went numb as I pulled out the letter. The first line said the school had approved my preserved enrollment status and expected me to return before the deadline. 3 years ago. 3 years ago, Grace had told me no one in the city wanted me back. She had patted my shoulder and said, and quote, stop dreaming, Clara. Your life is here now. This family still needs you. And quote. I folded the letter carefully. The sharp paper edge rubbed the cut in my palm, and that small pain kept me steady. When I reached the Yao house, I heard voices from inside before I entered. Grace was speaking in a harsh whisper. And quote, find everything. If she sees those old letters, this family will never have peace again, and quote. Sylvia sobbed. And quote. I told you this couldn't and Apo's stay hidden. If Clara gets her file back, she will never forgive me. And quote. I pushed the gate open. The old wooden door shrieked. Inside the east room, a cedar chest lay open on the floor. Clothes, ration coupons, old envelopes, and a small red-covered notebook were scattered everywhere. Grace knelt beside the chest, holding a stack of papers behind her back. Sylvia stood near the bed, tears still wet on her face. I stepped inside. And quote, what are you looking for? And quote, Grace tried to stand. And quote, why are you back? And quote, what are you hiding? And quote, this is family property. And quote, am I family? And quote, she could not answer. I held out my hand. And quote, give it to me. And quote, she clutched the papers tighter. And quote, are you robbing your own mother now? And quote, I looked at her. And quote, when you put a fake thumbprint beside my name, did you remember I was your daughter? And quote, Sylvia rushed forward. And quote, Clara, Don and Apo's do this. Mom and Apo's blood pressure, and quote. I pulled my arm free. Sylvia stumbled back against the bed and coughed. Grace rushed to hold her as if she might break. I stood there and watched. When I was a child and had a fever, Grace used to hold me like that. But after she married into the Yao family, that tenderness became rare. Sylvia coughed twice and Grace stayed up all night. I came back from harvest with a torn nail, and she pushed a sewing basket toward me and told me to wrap it myself before morning work. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, I said, and quote, Grace Tang. And quote, she looked up sharply. And quote, what did you call me? And quote, your name, and quote, I said. And quote, from today on I will not call you Mom. And quote, the room went still. I crouched beside the chest and gathered the letters before she could stop me. Grace lunged for them. Her fingernails caught my cheek, leaving a thin sting across the skin. I ignored it. Sylvia whispered and quote, Grace had written it all down. She had not forgotten anything. She had remembered every sacrifice. She had just never remembered me. Then she did the one thing she knew had always worked before. She dropped to her knees. End quote. Clara, end quote, she sobbed, clutching my pant leg. End quote, please. Sylvia and Appo's marriage depends on this. Her future husband and Appo's family will only take her if she goes back to the city and gets a job arranged. She is not like you. She has no ability. She cannot survive out here. End quote. I looked down at her. She knelt so easily, as if she knew exactly which part of me she was trying to break. In the past, whenever Grace cried, I felt cruel for wanting anything for myself. She cried about how hard the Yao family had it, and I handed over cloth coupons. She cried about Sylvia staying up all night, and I gave up my visit home. She cried about Calvin being young, and I gave him the egg from my bowl. Now she was kneeling again, asking me to take my own future and lay it beneath Sylvia and Appo's feet. I crouched so we were eye to eye. End quote, Grace Tang, end quote, I said, end quote, you are kneeling to the wrong person. You should kneel at my father and Appo's grave. Before he died, he trusted you to protect me, not to tear me apart piece by piece and feed me to the Yao family. End quote. Her hands fell away. Sylvia suddenly reached for the notebook. I caught her wrist and pressed her hand down beside the school letter. End quote. Do you know what this is? End quote. End quote. I Don and Appo's tea. End quote. End quote. You do, end quote, I said. End quote. You not only knew, you were planning to use it to prove I was still stuck in the countryside and had missed my school deadline. End quote. Her eyes flashed. I knew I had guessed right. Grace shouted that I was lying. I turned toward the open door. End quote. Then let us ask the township office, the school, the youth administration, and the county department. We can compare every letter. End quote. Sylvia cried out, end quote, no. End quote. She realized her mistake the moment she spoke. Someone coughed outside. Mr. Martin stood at the gate with Mr. Price and May behind him. Several workers from the team had followed them after work. No one said a word. Mr. Martin and Appo's face was cold. End quote, why not? End quote, he asked. Grace sank onto the floor. The next morning, Red Flag team held a public meeting on the drying yard. A wooden table stood in the middle of the yard, one leg propped up with a broken brick. Mr. Martin sat behind it with the work point register. Mr. Powell from the youth office came, pale and sweating. The township sent Miss Hayes, a quiet woman with black-framed glasses and a notebook. By the time the Yao family arrived, the yard was crowded. Grace walked first. Sylvia followed with a shawl around her shoulders, looking fragile enough to invite pity. Someone whispered that she really did look weak. Another voice answered, end quote, weak but strong enough to carry someone else and Appo's file. End quote. I stood at the edge of the crowd with May behind me. End quote. Don and Appo's. Be afraid, end quote, she whispered. I looked at the red stamp on the table. End quote, I and Appo's am not. End quote. Mr. Martin knocked on the table. End quote. We are here because the return to city file of Clara 1 was taken under another person and Appo's hand, end quote. The word taken moved through the crowd like a spark. Grace stood up quickly. End quote. This is a family misunderstanding. You cannot use words like that. End quote. I stepped forward. End quote. Sylvia Yao and I are not in the same household registration, end quote. I placed a copy of the registry on the table. Miss Hayes read it, and her brows tightened. Sylvia Yao was registered under the Yao household in the city. She had only stayed in the village under the excuse of illness. She had never been a qualified rural youth candidate for this return to city round. Mr. Price slammed the workpoint book down and read aloud. Sylvia Yao. 123 sick days in 1 year. 4 city visits in another. Long leave. Barely any registered work points. Then he read my page. Clara 1. 319 work points. 346 work points. Canal repair bonus. Autumn harvest bonus. Night watch duty. End quote. The achievements used in the recommendation, end quote. He said, end quote. Belonged to Clara 1, not Sylvia Yao, end quote. Sylvia shook her head, tears falling again. End quote. I never claimed they were mine. Mom said we would only borrow Clara and Appo's file for now and later, end quote. She stopped. Miss Hayes looked up. End quote. Borrow a file. End quote. Grace and Appo's face turned purple. I laid the forged withdrawal letter on the table. Beside it I laid my real thumbprint. Miss Hayes compared them in silence. Then Mr. Martin asked Mr. Powell, end quote, who handed you the withdrawal letter? End quote. Mr. Powell wiped his forehead. End quote. Grace Tang. End quote. Grace trembled. End quote. We discussed it at home. End quote. End quote. With whom? End quote. I asked. She glared at me. End quote. Must you push me this far? End quote. End quote. Yes, end quote, I said. The yard went quiet. I took out the old letters. End quote. This school notice came 3 years ago. This factory recruitment came 2 years ago. This return registration notice came last year. I never saw any of them, end quote. The crowd erupted. Grace finally screamed, end quote. I did it for this family. The Yao family supported us. I had to repay them. Sylvia is weak. Calvin was young. You were the capable one. Would it have killed you to carry a little more? End quote. And there it was. The truth. She knew I hurt. She simply believed I could take it. If you can carry weight, people like Grace will keep adding stones until you disappear under them. I opened the red notebook. End quote. My cloth coupons went to Calvin. My grain coupons went to Sylvia. My home visit fare was given away. My work points paid the Yao family and Appo's grain debt. All of this is in her handwriting. End quote. Grace lunged for the notebook. I held it down. Sylvia suddenly pressed a hand to her chest and began to sink to the ground. For a moment people moved to help her. I stepped forward and caught her arm. She forgot to faint. I leaned close and said, calmly enough for the front row to hear, end quote. If you are truly sick, I will ask Mr. Martin to take you to the clinic right now. The doctor can examine you and issue a certificate. Then we will all know whether you are too weak to stay here or just weak when truth is near you. End quote. Her face went stiff. A few people in the crowd coughed to hide their laughter. Miss Hayes closed her notebook. End quote. This matter is serious, end quote, she said. End quote. The return file of Clara 1 must not be used by anyone else. The forged signature, the thumbprint, and the altered recommendation draft will be sent for review. Until a decision is issued, Sylvia Yao may not use any document related to Clara 1 and Appo's return placement, end quote. My shoulders loosened slightly. Then Mr. Powell whispered, end quote. The file was already sent to the county once, end quote. Ms. Hayes stood so fast her chair scraped the ground. End quote. When? End quote. End quote. Yesterday afternoon. End quote. That was before the list had even been posted. I turned to Sylvia. Her face had no color left. End quote. You knew my name was on the list before I did, end quote, I said. She backed away. End quote. You knew, end quote, I repeated, end quote, and you still tried to take it. End quote. By afternoon we were at the county office. Director Lawson opened the original records and compared the documents one by one. Mr. Martin and Appo's handwritten draft named me. The work records named me. The altered draft had my name crossed out and Sylvia and Appo's written above it. The thumbprint did not match mine. End quote. Who changed this? End quote. Director Lawson asked. No one answered. Grace began crying again. End quote. We are a poor family, end quote, she said. End quote. Sylvia is weak. Claire is capable anywhere. I thought family should help the weaker child first. End quote. Director Lawson cut her off. End quote. Being weaker does not give anyone the right to steal another person and Appo's placement. End quote. Sylvia suddenly shouted, end quote. Then what about my wedding? End quote. Everyone stared at her. Now the truth had lost its makeup. End quote. His family agreed because I was supposed to return to the city, end quote, Sylvia cried. End quote. The food factory was already expecting me. If I don and Appo's go back they and Appo's I'll cancel everything. End quote. I looked at her. So that was the life-or-death illness she had cried about. Not a disease. If she could get to the city before the paperwork fully locked, she might still push herself into her fiancé and Apos' family or the food factory and make the case messy all over again. I climbed onto the back of Mr. Martin and Apos' bicycle and we raced down the dirt road. We caught her beneath the weak yellow light of the county bus station. She had a cloth bag in her arms and mud on her shoes. When she saw me, hatred sharpened her face. End quote. Clara won, end quote, she said, end quote. Must you drive me into a corner? End quote. End quote. Open the bag. End quote. End quote. These are my personal things. End quote. End quote. Open it. End quote. She tried to step back. Mr. Martin blocked the way. End quote. Sylvia Yao, end quote. He said, end quote. You are under review for forged paperwork. You are not leaving tonight. End quote. She screamed that she was only going to the city for medical treatment. I pulled the bag from her hand. The strap snapped and the contents spilled onto the ground. Clothes, 2 flat cakes, loose bills, and another packet of documents wrapped in plastic. The top page was not from the youth office. It was a letter from the tractor station, stating that Sylvia Yao, a family member of Frank Yao, needed to go to the city for medical treatment and should receive assistance. Under it was a temporary labor agreement from the food factory. Named Sylvia Yao. Introduced by Frank Yao. I held it up. End quote. Medical treatment. End quote. Sylvia stared at the ground. Mr. Martin took the papers and laughed without humor. End quote. The youth file failed, so the Yao family opened another door. End quote. Sylvia lunged for the packet. I raised it out of reach, and she stumbled to her knees in the mud. For the first time she stopped pretending. End quote. Yes, I want to go. End quote, she shouted. End quote. Why do you get to return and I don't and Apos tea? Since we were children everyone praised you. Clara works hard. Clara's capable. Clara's just like her dead father. And me? My father calls me useless. My in-laws will not take me without a city job. Your mother cared about me once and you could not even let me have that. End quote. I crouched in front of her. End quote. Once? Grace cared about you for 6 years. She used my schooling to care about you. My coupons. My visits. My work points. My file. That is not one time, Sylvia. That is a whole life. End quote. The others arrived soon after. Miss Hayes, Mr. Price, Grace, and Frank Yao. When Grace saw Sylvia in the mud, she rushed forward. End quote. Sylvia. End quote. Frank saw the papers and lost his temper. End quote. You were still trying to run? End quote. Grace turned on me with tears and resentment mixed together. End quote. You won, Clara. What else do you want? End quote. I stood. End quote. I want her to stop using my life as a ladder. End quote. Miss Hayes collected the documents. End quote. These will be sealed. Sylvia Yao may not leave the township until the review is complete. End quote. Grace cried out. End quote. On what grounds? End quote. End quote. On the grounds that she is connected to forged administrative documents. End quote. Miss Hayes said. Frank suddenly shoved Grace aside. End quote. This is all your fault. End quote. Grace screamed back. End quote. When you signed as guarantor, why didn't an Apos you object? When you used Clara and Apos' work points to cover the family grain debt, why didn't an Apos you object? When you sent her to the countryside in Sylvia and Apos' place, why didn't an Apos you object? End quote. Under the bus station light, the whole Yao family finally tore itself open. 4 years they had eaten at the same table and divided my coupons, my work, my chances, and my future between them. Now, without me as the board to cut on, they had only each other. Grace looked at me one last time. Her face was wet, her voice hoarse. End quote. Clara, I was wrong. If you go back to the city, how am I supposed to live? End quote. That was probably the truest thing she had ever said to me. She did not ask how Sylvia would live. She asked how she would live. I adjusted the strap of my bag. End quote. You still have the Yao family, end quote, I said. Then I walked away. The next morning, Miss Hayes handed me a new sealed file envelope. This time the label was clean. Clara won. She placed a new confirmation sheet in front of me. And quote, sign here yourself. Thumbprint here yourself. And quote. I signed my name slowly. Then I pressed my right thumb into the red ink and onto the page. The broken line in my print appeared clearly. Miss Hayes nodded. And quote, now it is correct. End quote. 3 days later the county receipt arrived. The loudspeaker announced my name while I was washing clothes behind the youth dormitory. May came running from the front yard. End quote, Clara. It and Appos s here. The county accepted your file. End quote. At the office I read the notice twice. The red flag team and Appos s recommendation for Clara 1 was true and valid. The documents previously submitted for Sylvia Yao were rejected due to alteration and impersonation. Clara 1 and Appos s return placement had been officially restored to review status. My eyes stung. Mr. Price stood near the door with his hands behind his back. End quote. Sweat belongs to the one who shed it, end quote. He said. End quote. So does the road it earns, end quote. The fallout spread quickly. Sylvia and Appos s fiancé and Appos s family withdrew from the marriage talks the same afternoon. They came to the Yao house and took back the small gifts they had brought. A thermos and 2 boxes of sweets. His aunt shouted in front of the gate that they wanted a daughter-in-law, not someone who stole another woman and Appos s future. Frank Yao was disciplined by the tractor station for issuing false support papers. Mr. Powell was transferred out of the youth administration office and made to read a public self-criticism. Grace came looking for me 3 times. The first time she brought boiled sweet potatoes and stood outside the youth dormitory. End quote. Clara, take these for the road, end quote, she said. I did not come out. The second time she stopped me near the cooperative store. Her hair had gone gray around the temples. End quote. Frank wants to divorce me, end quote, she said. I looked at a piece of blue cloth behind the glass. I had saved my last coupons for it. I wanted to make a clean jacket for the city. End quote. Then go talk to Frank, end quote, I said. She cried. End quote. Are you really this heartless? End quote. End quote. No, end quote, I said. End quote. I am only not letting you hold on to me anymore. End quote. The third time was the day before I left Red Flag Team. She brought Calvin with her. He was 16 now, taller than I was, wearing an old winter jacket made from the cloth coupons I had given up years earlier. He stood behind Grace, ashamed to meet my eyes. End quote. Talk to your sister, end quote. Grace whispered, pushing him forward. End quote, sister, end quote, he said. I put down the old textbook I had been reading. May had found it for me in a pile of scrap paper. I planned to study at night after I returned to the city. End quote, Don and Appos, T call me that. End quote. Grace flinched. End quote. He was only a child, end quote. End quote. I was 18 when you sent me to the countryside in Sylvia and Appos s place, end quote, I said. End quote. I was a child too. End quote. Calvin took a wrinkled paper from his pocket. End quote. This is a list of the cloth coupons you gave me. I didn't and Appos T know they were yours. I thought Mom bought them. I and Appos I'll pay you back someday. End quote. I did not take it. End quote. Who are you going to repay? End quote, I asked. He froze. End quote. What you spent was the life I had then. That Clara has already been drained by your family. End quote. His face went pale. I placed the textbook in my bag. End quote. Do not come looking for me again. End quote. Then I closed the door. Grace cried outside, but for the first time in my life I did not open it. On the morning I left, the sky was just beginning to brighten. The township tractor took me to the county bus station. This time Frank Yao was not driving. Mr. Martin carried my luggage himself. Mr. Price pressed a cloth bundle into my hands. Inside were corn cakes and 2 boiled eggs. End quote. Eat on the road, end quote, he said. End quote. Don and Appos T go hungry. End quote. I accepted it, my throat tight. May hugged me hard. End quote. Write to me when you get there. End quote. End quote. I will. End quote. Her eyes were red. End quote. You better live well. End quote. I smiled. End quote. I will. End quote. At the bus station, I held my county receipt and transfer notice inside my coat, close to my heart. This time every paper belonged to me. But the noise of those machines felt warmer than the winter wind that used to whistle through the cracks of the youth dormitory. At night, I enrolled in the Factory and Appo's adult education program. On the registration form I wrote my name carefully. Clara 1. The teacher read my old records and nodded. And quote, "Your grades used to be strong. You lost some years, but if you work hard you can catch up." End quote. End quote. I will catch up, end quote, I said. With my first paycheck I bought myself a fountain pen, a new notebook and a blue jacket. I sent nothing to the Yao family. Grace sent 2 letters through someone else. The first said she was sick. The second said Sylvia cried every day, Frank wanted a divorce, and Calvin needed tuition. I returned both envelopes unopened. On the outside I wrote 4 words. No such recipient. Months passed. News reached me through May and Appo's letters. Sylvia and Appo's wedding had collapsed completely. The food factory refused her. Frank and Appo's station cut his subsidy and made him write a formal apology. The Yao house still stood, but now it stood on its own feet instead of on my back. The next spring I passed my adult education exam. The textile factory approved my permanent worker status. That evening after my shift, I went to a photo studio. The photographer told me to sit straight and look at the camera. I wore my new blue jacket. My hair was combed neatly behind my ears. My hands rested on my knees. Just before the picture was taken, I touched my right thumb. The scar was faint now, but it was still there. On paper, it would always leave that broken line. The photographer said, end quote, "Smile." End quote. I did not smile widely. I only lifted the corner of my mouth. When I picked up the photo, the date was written on the back in blue ink. I placed it inside the first page of my new notebook, beside the county notice that had restored my return placement. 2 pieces of paper. One proved that someone had tried to steal my life. The other proved that I had taken it back with my own hands. And this time no one could put their name over mine.